6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan seemed unstoppable, expanding across the Pacific while the United States struggled to recover. But what if the fate of the entire war hinged on a tiny remote outpost and a single cryptic message intercepted by codebreakers? The story behind the two Midway battle is not just one of firepower, it is a story of knowledge wielded like a secret weapon. How did a handful of intelligence officers set a trap that would turn a losing streak into a turning point? The answer begins here. In early June 1942, the Pacific Ocean stretched as a vast arena of uncertainty and ambition. Japanese forces, fresh from 6 months of victories, controlled an empire that now reached from Southeast Asia to the edges of Alaska. The Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies had all fallen. Oil, rubber, and raw materials poured into Japan's war machine, fueling a campaign that seemed impossible to slow. Yet, beneath the surface, the balance was already shifting. United States shipyards on the West Coast were running day and night, launching new vessels to replace those lost at Pearl Harbor. The United States Navy was battered, but not broken. Even as Japan pressed outward, the United States had begun to recover, launching daring raids and probing attacks that signaled a growing confidence. The Doolittle raid in April had shown Tokyo itself was not beyond reach. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, American and Australian forces had managed to blunt a Japanese advance for the first time, though at great cost. Between these two giants stood Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral and sand just over 2 square miles in size, sitting more than 1,200 miles northwest of Hawaii. To most, it was little more than a refueling stop for seaplanes and a weather outpost. But for both navies, Midway's value was out of all proportion to its size. Whoever controlled Midway could threaten Hawaii or project power deeper into the Pacific. For Japan, capturing the atoll would push its defensive perimeter forward, put Hawaii within striking distance, and perhaps force the United States to accept new boundaries in the Pacific. For the Americans, holding Midway meant holding the line, keeping a foothold from which to launch future offensives, and denying Japan a platform for further expansion. By June, the United States Navy could muster just 3 operational carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown. Japan, by contrast, was sending 4 of its finest: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. On paper, the odds favored Tokyo, but the Pacific was not a chessboard of perfect information. Each side was searching for an advantage, a way to tip the scales. As fleets converged on Midway, the fate of the Pacific War would hinge on more than just ships and planes. It would depend on who could see further, act faster, and seize opportunity in the fog of war. Deep within a cramped, windowless room at Pearl Harbor, a handful of Navy codebreakers worked around the clock. Commander Joseph Rochefort, often in his trademark bathrobe, led Station HYPO, a team of linguists, mathematicians, and analysts surrounded by stacks of encrypted messages and the constant clatter of tabulating machines. Every intercepted Japanese transmission was another puzzle, another chance to find the answer that could change the course of the war. By late spring 1942, Rochefort's team had partially broken the Japanese naval code known as JN-25. Through weeks of painstaking work, they began to see a pattern in Japanese plans for a major operation codenamed MI, aimed at a place they called AF. But with the Pacific at stake, guessing was not enough. The meaning of AF had to be proven beyond doubt. Jasper Holmes, one of HYPO's analysts, suggested a simple test. He proposed that Midway send an unencrypted radio message stating its water distillation plant had broken down leaving the island short of fresh water. The message was sent. Within 2 days, HYPO intercepted a Japanese communication reporting that AF is short of water. The codebreakers had their answer. AF was Midway. This small confirmation carried enormous weight. Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet's intelligence officer, relayed the news to Admiral Chester Nimitz. Nimitz now had proof of Japan's intentions. Midway was the target, and the attack would come in early June. With this knowledge, he made a decision that would define the coming battle. Rather than defend reactively, Nimitz ordered his 3 available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the battered Yorktown, to take up hidden positions northeast of Midway, forming an ambush. The work at Station HYPO did not end with the water ruse. Every day brought new intercepts and more fragments to piece together. Analysts like Alva Laswell and Joseph Finnegan tracked message volume, call signs, and ship movements, building a picture of Japanese force structure even when the code itself remained only partially readable. Their findings reached Nimitz through Layton, shaping every operational order and fueling the quiet confidence behind the American plan. The pressure on Rochefort's team was relentless. One mistake could send American ships into a trap or leave Midway exposed. Yet the codebreakers pressed on, knowing their work would never make headlines, but might decide the fate of fleets and the future of the Pacific. In those weeks before battle, knowledge itself became the weapon, forged in secrecy and delivered not with guns, but with a single intercepted message. With the enemy's plan revealed, the U.S. Navy was ready to meet the challenge at Midway, not as a victim, but as a hunter lying in wait. Operation MI was drawn up in Tokyo as a masterstroke, one that aimed to end American resistance in the Central Pacific. Japanese planners led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed the key to victory lay in surprise and overwhelming firepower. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the core of the strike force under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, a veteran of surface warfare now tasked with leading the most advanced carrier group in the world. These ships, along with their escorts, were expected to crush any American opposition at Midway, then lure out the remaining U.S. carriers for a final, decisive battle. Confidence ran high within the combined fleet. 6 months of victories had convinced many in the Japanese command that American naval power was broken. The assumption was that, faced with a direct threat to Hawaii, the battered U.S. fleet would rush to defend Midway. Japanese doctrine called for a classic ambush: strike the island, draw out the enemy, and finish the job with superior numbers and skill. To further tip the odds, a separate Japanese force was sent north to attack the Aleutian Islands, hoping to distract American attention and split their forces. Yet beneath the surface, the plan carried hidden risks. The 4 carriers and their escorts would operate far from the rest of the Japanese fleet, relying on timing and secrecy rather than mutual support. The Northern Task Force, steaming toward the Aleutians, pulled away valuable ships and aircraft that might have strengthened the main attack. Even Nagumo's carrier group, while formidable, would be without the immediate backup of battleships and cruisers stationed hundreds of miles behind. The plan's complexity depended on flawless execution, and on the Americans reacting quickly as expected. Nagumo himself was cautious by nature, trained in battleship tactics rather than carrier warfare. He trusted that his air crews, considered the best in the world, would deliver a swift knockout blow. But he also depended on intelligence that underestimated American resilience and the reach of U.S. codebreakers. Reconnaissance was spread thin, with only a handful of scout planes searching the vast Pacific for enemy ships. The belief that surprise was assured left little room for error or adaptation. As the fleet moved east, Nagumo's staff reviewed the plan again and again. Their confidence rested on two pillars: the expectation of total surprise and the conviction that American forces would respond predictably to Japanese moves. But in the shadows of this blueprint, the seeds of vulnerability were already sown. The carriers sailed toward Midway, certain of their advantage, unaware that the real balance of power was already shifting beyond their sight. Dawn broke over Midway on June 4, 1942, with the island's defenders already braced for the worst. At 4:30 in the morning, the first wave of Japanese aircraft roared in from the east, dropping bombs and strafing the runways. The garrison, Marines, Navy, and Coast Guard scrambled to their stations, manning anti-aircraft guns and launching every available fighter. Radar had given a brief warning, but the defenders faced overwhelming odds. The air was thick with smoke as American planes tried to intercept the attackers, but many were outmatched by the faster, more agile Japanese Zeros. Still, the defenders held their ground, keeping the airfield operational and communications intact, even as buildings burned and casualties mounted. While the battle raged over the island, Vice Admiral Nagumo aboard Akagi faced a decision that would haunt the Japanese fleet. Reports from the first strike indicated Midway's airfield was still usable. At 7:15 in the morning, Nagumo ordered his reserve aircraft, waiting below deck and originally armed for ship attack, to be rearmed with bombs suited for land targets. On the crowded hangar decks, crews worked at a frantic pace, swapping torpedoes for general-purpose bombs. The process was slow and hazardous. Ordnance was stacked in the open, fueling lines ran across the decks, and every minute spent rearming increased the risk if enemy aircraft appeared. American bombers and torpedo planes from Midway launched scattered attacks against the Japanese carriers throughout the morning. These early strikes were repulsed with heavy losses, but they forced the Japanese ships into constant evasive maneuvers, disrupting the careful choreography of flight operations. Each time the carriers swung hard to avoid torpedoes or bombs, deck crews had to halt their work, planes were jostled out of position, and the risk of accident or explosion grew. At 7:28 in the morning, a scout plane from the cruiser Tone finally reported sighting an American naval force to the northeast. The message, delayed by transmission problems, was vague. There was no mention yet of the presence of carriers. Nagumo hesitated. Should he continue preparing for a second strike on Midway, or switch back to anti-ship weapons? Orders went out to hold on rearming some planes, but confusion spread across the flight decks. As the minutes ticked by, Japanese carriers became more vulnerable, their decks crowded with armed and fueled aircraft, ordnance scattered, and defensive readiness uncertain. Down below, the pressure on the crews never let up. Every order to change bombs or torpedoes meant more time exposed, more risk piled on top of fatigue. Above them, the sky was filled with the distant rumble of engines and the threat that somewhere, unseen, American carriers might already be launching their own strike. The window of vulnerability was opening wider with each passing moment. Torpedo squadrons from Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown pressed low-altitude attacks, flying into a wall of Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Nearly every plane was lost. The sacrifice was staggering. Of 41 torpedo bombers launched, just a handful returned. Those doomed attacks forced Japanese combat air patrols down to sea level, leaving the skies above the carriers momentarily exposed. High above, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey led the Enterprise dive bomber squadrons, searching for the enemy fleet. The carriers were not where intelligence had placed them. With fuel running low, McCluskey spotted the destroyer Arashi racing north. He made a split-second decision to follow its wake. The gamble paid off. The destroyer path led straight to the heart of the Japanese carrier formation. At 10:25 in the morning, McCluskey's SBD Dauntless dive bombers broke through the clouds. Below, the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were crowded with armed and fueled aircraft, ordnance stacked in the open, and crews scrambling to recover returning planes. Japanese fighters, drawn low by the earlier torpedo attacks, were out of position. The timing could not have been more precise. McCluskey's group split. Most of the Enterprise bombers dove on Kaga, mistaking it for the flagship. At least 4 1,000-pound bombs smashed through the flight deck, touching off explosions among the planes and fuel below. Nearby, 3 bombs struck Soryu, igniting fires that raced through hangar spaces. Lieutenant Commander Richard Best and 2 wingmen peeled away and targeted Akagi. A single bomb tore through the flight deck, detonating among torpedo-laden aircraft and triggering uncontrollable fires. Within 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's frontline carriers were engulfed in flames. The shock was immediate. Japanese crews struggled against the fires, but the damage was irreversible. Most of the air wings were lost, and those pilots who survived the morning strikes now had nowhere to land. The momentum of the battle swung in an instant, driven by a combination of sacrifice, navigation, and timing that would echo through history. McCluskey's decision and the precision of the attack changed the course of the Pacific War. Hiryu alone remained in action as smoke billowed from the shattered decks of her sister carriers. Captain Tomeo Kaku ordered a swift counterattack. At midday, 18 dive bombers lifted from Hiryu's deck, guided by seasoned pilots who had survived the morning's chaos. Their target was USS Yorktown. The American carrier, still launching and recovering planes, was caught off guard. 3 bombs struck Yorktown's flight deck and superstructure, knocking out boilers and starting fires that sent black columns skyward. For a moment, it looked as if the momentum might swing back to Japan. Below decks, Yorktown's damage control teams moved with practiced urgency. Fire hoses snaked through passageways, pumps roared to life, and sailors sealed off flooded compartments. In less than an hour, the crew restored power to 2 boilers and cleared the flight deck for operations. Planes were soon landing and taking off again, a testament to training, discipline, and sheer resolve under pressure. But Hiryu was not finished. By late afternoon, a second strike force of 10 Kate torpedo bombers closed in on Yorktown. The carrier's gunners fired until barrels glowed, but 2 torpedoes found their mark. Water surged through the hull. The ship listed sharply, and power failed. Captain Buckmaster ordered abandon ship. Yorktown's crew slid into the sea, many clinging to rafts as destroyers circled to pull them from the waves. Yet the carrier refused to sink, remaining afloat and defiant through the night. American scouts had tracked the Japanese bombers back to their source. As dusk approached, dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown located Hiryu. 4 direct hits struck her decks, igniting fires that raged out of control. By midnight, Hiryu's crew had been ordered to abandon ship. The last operational Japanese carrier slipped beneath the waves the next morning, scuttled by her escorts. The cost to Japan was staggering. 4 fleet carriers lost in a single day, along with over 200 aircraft and a generation of veteran aircrews. These pilots, trained before the war in a system that could not quickly replace them, were gone for good. For the United States, the loss of Yorktown was heavy, but new ships and fresh crews would soon fill the gap. In the Pacific, The balance had shifted. The Japanese carrier strike force was broken, and with it, the prospect of further expansion. The outcome at Midway would echo far beyond the horizon, shaping the course of the war and the fate of nations. Intelligence, timing, and human resolve didn't just decide a battle, they redefined the balance of power in the Pacific. Today, information still shapes every conflict, and decisive moments often unfold far from any front line. The lesson endures. Even the smallest signals can tip the course of history. What does that mean for the battles we don't see coming? Share your perspective below.